Hello, my name is Professor Oak. Today I'm going to be talking to you about photosynthesis. We will be using all sorts of different Pokemon to explain all the aspects of photosynthesis.
Hello, Professor. Can you please help me understand what photosynthesis is?
Why, of course. First off, Pokemon like Venusaur have the ability to make food on their own. They do not need to rely on Pokemon food nor citrus berries. This ability is also known as photosynthesis. To begin, let's use certain Pokemon to represent factors that play in photosynthesis.
The equation for photosynthesis is 6CO2 plus 6H2O equals C6H12O6 plus 6O2. Carbon dioxide and H2O are the reactants and they yield to produce glucose and oxygen.
Which are the products?
Alright, let's use the Pokemon Solrock to reproduce the sun since, after all, he is the sun Pokemon. And for water, we can use Piplup.
Now coughing can represent carbon dioxide since it produces gases, and Thundurus can represent oxygen.
Lastly, Combi can represent the glucose since it is a honey Pokemon and it produces sugar in the form of honey.
Alright, so what's photosynthesis?
Photosynthesis is the process in which plants use sunlight to create their own food in the form of sugar. Sugar is also known as glucose, which is produced through photosynthesis. Let's take this into deeper context. Pokemon like Venusaur use photosynthesis to survive, and photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. So in Pokemon terms, during photosynthesis, plants use Solrock to create their own food in the form of combis.
The chloroplast is a green organelle that contains chlorophyll, in which is where photosynthesis takes place.
Also, the chlorophyll allows the plant to take it on a green color, as well as absorb sunlight through photosynthesis. That is why Venusaur is green color and has the ability to take on Solrock.
Alright, let's talk about the process of photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis can be divided into two major processes. First, you have the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction, which is also known as the Calvin cycle.
The light-dependent reaction uses light and water to create oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. So basically, the light-dependent reaction uses the light energy from Solrock and Piplup to create Thundurus, Solrock, and Pichu.
Venusaur has a green organelle known as chloroplast, and inside the chloroplast is the granum and the thylakoid. The granum are the stacks of discs in the chloroplast, and the thylakoid is the one disc in the chloroplast itself. Also, the space around the thylakoid and granum is known as the stroma. During the light-dependent reaction, the chlorophyll that Venusaur has begins to take in the light energy or photon from Solrock. This then generates energy, and the electrons begin to bounce around to each chlorophyll and thylakoid. So in Pokemon terms, once Solrock generates enough energy, Magnemite bounces around to each chlorophyll and thylakoid.
Also, when the electron is lost, the H2O, or water, releases one of its electrons to take its place, and in doing so, it yields oxygen. So Piplup releases Magnemite to take the place of the other Magnemite that is taken in by NADP+.
Also, during this process, the NADP plus catches the electrons once it is bounced around, and this is then converted to NADPH since it is caught by the electron. So basically, Pikachu catches the Magnemite, and as a result, it then evolves and turns into the precursor, which is Pichu. Since the electron is bouncing around, it releases energy, which is then caught by ADP, which then converts to ATP. So as Magnemite is bounced around, Solrock is practically being released, and Dusknoir catches the energy, which then makes it evolve back into Solrock.
NADPH is an electron carrier, and ATP is an energy carrier. Two Pokemon that perfectly represent these are Pikachu and Solrock. Pikachu is an electron carrier, which allows it to use electricity to move. Solrock is an energy carrier since it carries energy in the form of sunlight.
Also, there's one more reaction that occurs, and it is the light-independent reaction. The light-independent reaction is the stage in which glucose forms, and this is basically where comb bee produces the honey. To make glucose, thunderous needs to be taken apart, and energy and an electron is needed. So Pikachu and Solrock would be needed in order for this process to happen. This reaction converts light energy into chemical energy, and this converts coughing, and which then converts it to comb bee. Now we're going to head over to the forest where two Pokemon are going to battle.
It looked like Torterra and Empoleon are about to have an intense battle. Torterra just used Frenzy Plants. This just created a lot of weeds on the battlefield to attack Empoleon.
Oh no! However, Empoleon is using a pesticide called triazine in order to get rid of it.
What is Trianthy?
Triazine is a pesticide that helps control weeds. So when Empoleon used it just now, it killed all of the weeds in order to clear the battlefield. It's usually used by industrial farmers, but I see Empoleon has found a use for it here.
Wait! I remember something about this. We learned about this in class. This all connects back to photosynthesis. Triazine prevents electron transport, also known as NADPH. Therefore, without the electrons, the plant cannot produce glucose in order to survive. So without Magnemite, comb bee would not be produced, and the plant Pokemon would then die.
But wait, Professor.
Yes.
Energy can just be produced through photosynthesis, though.
Yes, you are right. You also need cellular respiration.
Wait, I know this. Don't tell me. Oh, it's when the mitochondria uses oxygen and glucose to make energy.
And what is this energy also known as?
ADP?
ATP.
Correct. In order to explain this using a Pokemon, we're going to follow what the Pokemon we use in photosynthesis symbolize, since cellular respiration is like the inverse of photosynthesis.
So cellular respiration is the inverse of photosynthesis. Can you please explain what happens?
Well, cellular respiration is needed in photosynthesis so the cells can keep working. Cellular respiration converts biochemical energy from nutrients into ATP, and in this process, waste products are released.
Cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria and cytoplasm. The balance equation for cellular respiration is quite simple. It is the inverse of the photosynthesis equation, and so the cellular respiration equation is C6H12O6 plus 6O2 yields to produce 6CO2 plus 6H2O. In terms of Pokemon, one comb bee combined with 6 Thunderuses yield to produce 6 Coughings and 6 Piplups. In this equation, comb bee and Thundurus are the reactants, while Coughing and Piplup are the products.
Now let's move on to the stage of cellular respiration. The first stage is glycolysis.
Well, in the process of glycolysis, it harvests energy and breaks down glucose into pyruvate. For every 1 glucose, it produces 2 molecules of pyruvate, and during glycolysis, 2 NAD plus lose an electron and become 2 NADH, and 2 ATP becomes 2 NADP. And since the bonds break, energy is released. Then 4 ADP take in energy and become 4 ATP. In this stage, glucose, NAD+, and ADP goes in, and as a result, pyruvate, NADH, and ATP is produced.
Now let's move on into the second stage of cellular respiration. The next stage is the Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, it completes the breakdown of glucose. So it's like comb bees splitting apart.
The Krebs cycle takes place in the cytosol, and One cone B converts to 2 pyruvates, which then turns into acetyl-CoA.
During the Krebs cycle, one pyruvate is turning into acetyl-CoA through the Krebs cycle. During this process, ADP becomes ATP, 3NAD plus becomes 3NADH, and FAD plus becomes FADH2. As a result, carbon dioxide is formed.
So in more specific terms, one glucose forms 2 pyruvates, and from each pyruvate you get acetyl-CoA. And since there are 2 pyruvates, you have a total of 2 acetyl-CoA. So from cone B, you get 2 electrodes, and from each electrode, there's 1 muck. So in total, you have 2 mucks present. The Krebs cycle then happens twice, and during that process, Dusk Nor becomes Solrock, and 3 Pikachus become 3 Pichus since they lose magnemites. And Plusle becomes Minim since it gives off a magnemite as well. From this process, then 3 coughings are released.
Now let's move on to oxidation phosphorylation. It is driven by electron transport chains, and it generates soul rocks. Oxidation phosphorylation takes place in the mitochondria. Within the mitochondria, there is an outer membrane, intermembrane, and an inner membrane. The process of oxidation phosphorylation takes place there in the intermembrane space.
So what happens is that NADH loses an electron to form NAD+. Then FADH2 loses an electron and becomes FAD+. The electrons are then transported through the protein complex, and the hydrogens are attracted to the electrons. However, the protein complex does not want the hydrogen ions either, so it spits them out into the intermembrane space. As hydrogen ions fill up in the intermembrane space, the hydrogen gradient is formed. Since molecules want to go from high to low concentration, the movement of the hydrogen ions create kinetic energy. ADP then takes in this energy, and the ATP synthase uses that potential energy in the form of ATP. H2O is formed as well from the oxidative phosphorylation process because the hydrogen molecules binds to the electrons, and oxygen is the final electron acceptor, so H2O is the waste product in the end.
Hey Professor, I've heard about metabolic inhibitors and want to learn more. Could you teach me a thing or two?
Of course. The one that pops into my mind is pyruvate kinase deficiency. This is when there's a lack of enzyme pyruvate kinase. Then, since there's a lack of it, there's not enough energy and it breaks down more easily.
I'm lost. What does this have to do with cellular respiration?
Let's say we have a male and female Pokemon that are expecting soon. Unfortunately, both have inherited the PKLR gene and each have a copy of the mutated cell. This is the only way the deficiency can be passed down, when there are 2 copies of the mutated cell.
So what is so important about
The enzyme.
the enzyme?
The enzyme has to do with the process of glycolysis, one of the 3 stages of cellular respiration.
So if this interrupts the process of glycolysis, we're talking about energy and oxygen, right?
Precisely. Going back to Ash's question, it has to do with cellular respiration because if there's a lack of pyruvate kinase enzyme, then there's a lack of ATP, which is needed for the cells to keep working.
Oh, so the red blood cells cannot carry oxygen into the rest of the body?
Which then leads to the body showing symptoms like anemia, fatigue, or pale skin.
So how are the Pokemon with this deficiency diagnosed?
Like I said before, if a Pokemon is experiencing fatigue, it could be a sign that they have the deficiency. But before any of that, if the baby is born, there can be two ways to diagnose it. First, if both parents have the gene, there's a big possibility the child could have it as well. If the baby is weak, that is a strong sign that he or she has inherited it.
What if there aren't any obvious signs?
The Pokemon can always take a blood test or genetic testing in order to closely examine the blood cells or genes.
Is there any way to treat this deficiency?
In most cases, there isn't anything that they really need to do. However, if it is severe, they might have to take out one spleen or perform blood transfusions.